Welcome to podcast number 2, airing live on March 17th, 2015. Today's episode is on data structure planning in pods. Our podcasts are regularly scheduled on the first and third Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Universal UTC.
Hi, this is Scott Clark. I just figured I'd throw in a song here, contextual to this week. Thought it'd be kind of funny. I just called to say, update your plugins. I just called to say, update them all. I just called to say, update your plugins. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. This is Scott.
Alrighty, guys. Welcome to our second PodsCast from the Pods Framework team. We have with us today Scott Kingsley Clark, the lead developer and grand poobah for Pods, and also a senior web engineer at 10up. We have Josh Pollock, community manager and developer at Pods and owner of the Caldera WP. We have Phil Lewis, developer at Pods, and we have myself, support lead and project manager at Pods. Like our regular channels, we will be taking questions live throughout the podcast. You have two ways of getting questions to us. You can join our Slack chat over at pods.io/chat and then ask in the #PodsCast channel, or tweet us at @PodsFramework. Okay, Josh, we're going to let you take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh. I'm the community manager for Pods. Today we're talking about planning in Pods. I am of the opinion that your project, how difficult it is, how easy it is, your overall success will be determined by how much pre-planning you do. So we're going to look at two cases today. Somebody's got their thing feeding back. Where one is going to be from a user's question that we answered on our support and channel on WordPress.org. And one's going to be a website that actually Jim created, so that way we can go in. So in addition to live music, we're going to have live diagramming today. So I wanted to jump into a support question, actually, we received here. Let me drag this onto my screen and just share with you what had happened here. This was a user who is looking to do a speakers page. Jim, can you share this link? It's in the doc. And they're doing a speaker site. They have lessons, they have lesson series, and then they have speakers. So what they need to be able to connect speakers to lessons, and then through that, lessons to speakers. And this is the kind of case where it's really useful to be able to do some diagramming, show out how are we going to relate these together. And how can we do it simply so we have as few fields as possible, so that way our queries are simpler. Oh, there's my cat again. And if we can do a little bit of diagramming, Jim? Jim?
I was muted. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, I'll forgive you.
Yeah, did you want to talk about what they're looking for first, or did you want a diagram first?
Well, let's put up a diagram, because what they're looking to do is they're looking to have some sort of content type that represents speakers, one sort of content type that represents speaker series, and one that represents lessons, which are contained within those series.
Okay, so we have series.
Mm-hmm. Are we looking at your screen, Jim?
Yeah, you should be. Can you see it? Oh. Okay.
Okay, so we have series, and I like this diagramming here. We have lessons, and then we have speakers. I like this type of diagramming because I think of content types as boxes. They're containers, whatever they are. If they're custom post types, if they're special tables using our advanced content types component, at the end of the day, they're containers where we're sticking this data. and then they're going to be related. So in this case, the needs are, can we show what are the lessons in this series and what are the speakers in this series? So to me, that puts lessons in the center. Because that way we would be able to say in speakers, what lesson is this a part of? And then through that, what series is that a part of? You don't need to get fancy. There's a lot of great diagramming tools on the internet. But at the end of the day, this is just about how are you going to make it easy for yourself to visualize. In this case, a relationship between speakers and lessons. So, and then we're also going to need another relationship between lessons and a series, because we want to be able to say what series is this a part of. And theoretically, we could create a third relationship here between speakers and series, but that would be redundant. And that's because we're able to traverse through these relationships here. So that's why we're just going to use two fields, and that'll allow me, and we'll show you how this works in a little bit, to query between, if I'm on a speakers page, to see what type of series this is. You can see I can just jump through these little arrows here. It helps to visualize it. When I'm making a site, I like to have this just in front of me so I can see it. Phil's made a really great plugin called Pods Visualize that you can see in our GitHub repo. He's still working on it, but it visualizes what exists currently. And so you could sort of use this to get to that point until those match up. But also, it'll show you what those relationships are when you jump into a site and you don't exactly know what it is. So before we go too further, one of the questions that we had for this is how to choose what content type these are. These are just boxes right now. They could be anything. They could be custom post type. They could be a custom taxonomy. They could be an advanced content type. Phil or Scott, do you have a good opinion on how you choose when you're doing pods development between different content types?
Yeah, so what I end up doing is I'll be looking specifically at my data needs, how much content, how many custom fields, how many relationships. A lot of those things can be very big determinations on exactly the type of content type you want. We have a diagram on our documentation for there's a comparison between different content types in Pods and WordPress, and it sort of goes into a really good breakdown of what exactly each one is best at and what it has out of the box. A lot of times I'll have clients or projects I've been working on that have specific needs, like they don't need all the fields, they just have a specific name, they have a bunch of very customized, highly specific things that they want to query a lot. And in those cases, sometimes an advanced content type, which gets its own table with its own columns, is a better option. There could be thousands or hundreds of thousands of pieces of data to track, and sometimes flooding that within the post table can be, or with the post meta table especially, can be really tricky. Can reduce performance of just the rest of the site that's unrelated. There could be lots of things in cases where, for instance, I had an events site that I built a while back. They had to rip out all the events data every day and reload it, and that can be volatile to a post table. The IDs will increase exponentially, and it's just much easier to run a query with a database to just truncate the whole table and start over. So there's things like that that are just much easier with advanced content types. But things like custom post types, they get a lot of stuff built in that make it easier to do things like commenting, term relationships, stuff like that. That's just super easy. So there's a lot of things you got to weigh between the two different types of content types, between custom post types and advanced content types. But when you get into categorization and stuff, that's where taxonomies come in handy. So yeah, there's really a lot of options.
Yeah, I like to stick with the native WordPress contents as much and as far as I can. So that's my default starting place, depending on how many records you have, how many relationships are involved, and what you're going to do with the data. If you have to import a whole bunch of records, or if there's a lot of live updating that's going on with a lot of relationships, then you have to look at, should I maybe move these off into their own tables? I can do this a whole lot more efficiently than with Meta. It's one of those things, again, too, that a lot is a different definition depending on what's going on and what you're using. If you only have to pull, multiple pieces of meta for 1 or 2 records per page, then it's not a huge issue. But if you start getting into regularly needing to deal with thousands of posts and maybe a half a dozen or a dozen pieces of meta, then it really starts to add up. I think you look in advance at how many records you're going to possibly need and run testing. There's nothing that can answer your question better than having benchmarks on the actual data that you anticipate to have, and the number of relationships and roughly the number of records you expect to have.
And then I think the other thing is, what plugins are you going to use? This goes into planning too. We're not really touching on that, but figuring out in advance how you're going to make certain things work. For instance, what are you going to do for search? There are a lot of great search options out there, but they're not going to work great with advanced content types. So, I had a recent site where advanced content types would have made my life really easy, but we wanted to use FacetWP in the front end a lot. FacetWP is actually made by the original Pods developer, Matt Gibbs, our founding developer. It's a really cool search tool. And like most things, it works with WP Query, which means it'll work with pods that are custom post types, but not advanced content types. So in that case, that was the defining thing. We would have to work around everything else in order to use that really cool interface. Jim, I like that you've included what type of relationships these are.
Yep.
Can you explain what you mean by one-to-many for people who aren't SQL?
Sure. When you're thinking about in the Pods interface, you've got that option of like single select or multiple select in the choice of like a drop-down or a checkbox field. When you're thinking of for us in SQL world, that means a one-to-many relationship in data or a many-to-one relationship in data. So you have to sit there and think about, okay, in my series, I have a whole series of stuff, but each one of those is one lesson in each series, or something of that nature. You have to determine how many lessons do I have in a series. Which is the side that has the most numbers on each other. Like in the case of like speakers, there's only going to be, actually that arrow should be going the other direction. And that should be you should only have one speaker per lesson. It would be the idea, is that you have to determine how many of whatever you're looking at, in the case of your data, how many speakers would be at one particular lesson. And so if you have like one lesson and there's like 7 different speakers there, like our PodsCast, then you would have a one-to-many relationship between lessons and speakers. If you had trying to sit there and think. And that's kind of the same way the series and the lessons goes, is that there's a number of lessons in a series, would be the idea, is that this series would be like something on building a WordPress website. And so each lesson would be each one of those underneath that particular series, like installing WordPress, setting up the theme, that sort of a thing. And so that's how you actually get the one-to-many relationship. So your lessons would actually be, when you created that relationship field from series to lessons, you would create it as a multiple select. Did that answer the question, Josh?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
So in this case, we would say we want series to have a single select in it for lessons, but series you would be having a multiple select of lessons, right? These are the 5 lessons in series, but in lessons, it's a single select. It's only part of one series. And that's very easy from the WordPress, from our Pods editor. Makes it very easy. Do you want single select? Do you want multiple select? And then, is that a checkbox? Is that a drop-down? Those sorts of things. Autocomplete is very useful as well. So at this stage, we would know what it is that we needed to do as far as what these boxes are. We'd have to know more about this particular site to choose whether in how we were going to handle our search and our display before we could really say if these are advanced content types or these are custom post types. I think Phil's got a good perspective on default to custom post types, but it doesn't always work. And then I wanted to go into, Scott, if you're ready to do some live coding in a second, how we're able to use the traversals in these. Because as I said, one would be tempted to make a third relationship here between speakers to series, so that we could show what series this speaker is using. But we can actually do traversals through, we can go speakers, what lesson, what series is this? So we can show what lessons, what series. Scott, are you able to show us how those traversals would work with Pods Find?
Yeah, I'm doing that right now.
Okay. Jim, can we see his screen?
Yeah, we're pointing at it, but he's doesn't have his camera on.
Yeah, I'm getting it up right now.
Oh, let me turn my screen share off because I think you're going to have to share your screen first. There you go. Let's see if we've got
And this is one of the things I think is really powerful about pods. It's not just that we can have these bidirectional relationships, but that they can go further. We can traverse from one to another to another. And we'll just touch briefly on how this works. If you look at the PodsCast episode 1, we do cover traversals very heavily when we cover the Pods Find class. But I just wanted to talk about that in relationship to what we're doing now.
Okay, so what would you like me to demo?
Can you show how you would do a traversal between two post types, like a second-order traversal? Right.
Sure,
So
you had,
I want to get all times that this speaker, is in a series called Beginning WordPress or something like that.
So let's do speaker. Let's assume we have a speaker CPT custom post type. So we're going to do a find lookup, and we're going to say where. And that will let us find all speakers who are in the series called this series. You can do lookups by individual names. So in this case, this is if I assume series is a custom post type, I need to reference the post title field here. We can also reference things like another custom field. So let's say day. Let's say series. So show me all speakers who spoke during a series that occurred in January. There's a pretty much an example of how to reference the series month custom field off of the series custom post type, which is related through the speaker pod. So there's a series relationship on the speaker pod itself.
Sorry, I was muted. Scott, can we do like a double traversal?
Sure. So how do you want to do that?
Can we go from speaker to lesson to series?
Sure.
Like, let's show all the lessons that this speaker is in a certain series. Or show all the speakers of this, something like that.
So in this case, we're going to find all speakers that have a lesson within the series, that series. So we have two traversals here. The lesson is a relationship to the speaker pod. Series is a relationship on the lesson pod. And post title is the field on the series custom post type. And we're basically looking up all speakers who have lessons that occur within the series of that series.
Okay, cool. So this is just showing how we're able to use this relationship from one box to another box to another box to do all sorts of things. We can say who are all, in this lesson. In this speaker series, we're going to have the following speakers. We're going to have the following lessons, for instance. Right, Scott, can you show an example where we're starting from the series?
Sure.
And we're going to show our lessons.
So we want to find all series or all lessons?
Let's start from series. Let's make our series pod. And then let's show ones where the speaker is Scott. Right, but in this case, we're going to have to traverse through lessons, right? Remember, it's series to lessons to speakers.
Okay. So in the case of series, lessons will be multiple select. It'll be multiple relationships, so there'll be multiple lessons per series as opposed to multiple series per lesson. So above here, speaker has, and actually this should probably be lessons here as well because there's multiple lessons for speakers. So what we're going to do here in this series, we're going to say find all series that has a lesson with a speaker of Scott Kingsley Clark.
Excellent. And so that's showing how that's another great example of how we don't need that third sort of bridge relationship between lessons and speakers because we can get there through series to speaker. We're able to get there through lessons. Does anybody else have anyone else to add there? Before we move on to our second example?
We actually have a question from the channel. Didn't we relate series to lesson to speaker? And I think Phil actually sat there and said lesson should be singular there. We might want to clarify a little bit about how those particular relationships work together.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good point about the name of the field, that it's good to match plural and singular, right? It doesn't matter. We could have called the field foo, but that would have been worthless to us. It's good to make it useful in what it represents, not just to call it lesson, but if it's a multi-select like we were talking about before, that we do call it lessons. If it's single select, we call it lesson.
I was just pointing it out for consistency in unusual Scott fashion. He had it fixed about the time that I noticed.
Perfect. And it looks like we're looking about 30 minutes left.
Yeah, so why don't we move on to a second example,
okay.
Which is a site that actually Jim's going to show us that he's done. So he could show us how this works in the interface.
Yep.
So Jim, why don't you show us that?
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk about some planning stuff too on how I did it. Basically, my concept was that you've got a gym or a yoga studio, and one of the things that those kind of places always have is they've got a schedule of classes, and they have different classes that may be on different days and different times of the week. They may be multiple times during the week, but usually they have one trainer for each one of those particular classes, and so they need to have that displayed in a very informative way. So I'm going to share my diagram. When you're thinking about that concept, you got to realize that you're going to have multiple schedules, but that's pretty much going to be the thing that actually owns everything else. So in my case, you actually have a one-to-many relationship between schedules to classes, and each class has its own trainer, so you have a one-to-many relationship between schedules to trainer. And that's kind of how that works. I'm going to actually show you in the interface, though, how that's going to work. In the actual Pods interface. In my case, I use Pods Frontier for this piece so that I could actually mock this up really quickly. Give me just a second. Okay. Oops, wrong screen. That screen. There we go. So let me boost that text size up a little bit. Wrong window. You kind of see what I'm trying to create with a listing of all the different classes that this particular gym has, the days of the week, the time of the class, and the trainers for those particular items. So on the back end, in Pods, come on, Mr. Dashboard, there we go. We have, in my case, 3 custom post types and 1 custom taxonomy. In the classes pod, it's really simple. This is the one that actually has most of the information, though. But we have a related field. I'm actually just using the editor, a featured image, and a custom taxonomy for this particular item. But the only actual pod field I need that's specific is related schedules. And this field is a relationship field onto schedules with a bidirectional field called class, and it's a multiple select autocomplete taggable. On the trainers page, I was going to do it off the users table but decided not to, but I think I actually have a link in the users table. Yeah, I do. I have a relationship to, let me zoom in a little bigger here. There we go. I have a relationship into the user account because each one of the trainers at this particular gym has an account on the pod's website. So we have an actual relationship to each one of those singular user accounts. You know, one trainer is one user, and their class is taught so that we have a back direction is the scheduled is a scheduled relationship field. It's a relationship field to the schedules table with the bidirectional at the trainer level so that we can actually, in the user interface, kind of see both sides of this without having to do all the traversals since I'm working in Frontier. I don't want to have to sit there and do any PHP coding, so I want to kind of have all that stuff kind of built in. And then we have one more. The screen's too big. That's the problem when you do these. There we go. We're going to show the last table pod in this relationship, which is the schedules. And this one is the one that actually pretty much drives everything because this is the one that ties everything else together. And let me zoom in a little bit more so you guys can read my screen. Okay, so in this case, I wanted to show a table so it was like day of the week, which is like a simple custom defined list, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. There's a start time and end time. And then we have a one-to-many relationship here to classes. In this case, it's a singular relationship. It's a relationship to classes on related schedules. It's a single select autocomplete. And that's the same case with the trainers. So now let's actually look at the data itself. If we go into schedules, you'll kind of see how this works on the back end. So in this case, you can create a new schedule. We'll just call it Saturday at noon. This is the nice thing that you have to think about is that you got to realize that your pod's admin is actually going to be used by someone who may not be a developer. So you kind of want to think along the lines of making this side very helpful to them. Select a class. We'll just call it kickboxing. Why not? And we'll select a trainer. That's all they have to do. Really straightforward and easy to do. Now, the power behind this is actually when you get into the Frontier templates. And then we're going to just basically talk about that one display screen that I showed you. Waiting for the editor to show up. Oh, it's all the way down here. Okay. Can you guys read that screen?
I can.
Okay, cool. Most of the power in this particular item comes from, we're basically just creating an unordered list. We're creating an unordered list of classes, in this case because I'm not actually building off my table of, we basically want to list each class, but we want to show what schedule is in that class. So, you know, basically what days of the week those classes are done. So we have the before tag, which is part of the Frontier template tag. So I want a UL class of class list. I have the LI, which is the wrapper for the list item for class, and then the post thumbnail for the image, so that I have that big picture at the top. Then I've got, like, within that, we have the first of our fun little Frontier template tags conditionals called if schedules related. This is basically going to look into that particular relationship field into the schedules pod and let us see if do I have any schedules for this particular class. If I do, then I start another list item underneath. And then we have the each block here. And you can actually go into, if I have schedules related, then I'm basically going to do schedules related, day of the week, start time, end time. We're going to traverse into the trainer here and give his permalink. And we're going to traverse into the trainer here and give his post title. Underneath the, I think that's everything. Those are the good ones anyway. And that's pretty much all it takes to build it. But one of the nice things about the Pods Frontier 2 is that it actually gives you the pod reference here. So like if I'm in schedules, it will tell me how to traverse into each one of the little field types for each one of our particular pods. So like if I'm in the class, I can go to its image here. If I'm inside, if I want to like drop down into trainers and get something from them, I can grab them from the same way. So it's kind of helpful. That's pretty much all I really have, but I'll show you the website again, or at least that page, so that you can kind of see how that kind of relationship process works. That one. And that's why this is grabbing the thumbnail from the classes pod. It's grabbing the title from the classes pod, but all of this information is coming from the schedules through the relationship from classes to schedule.
And so, Jim, what you just pointed out, that's the output of that Frontier template we were just looking at.
That is correct. And I actually mocked this website up in about, I thought about the data structure for about an hour. I built it in pods in like probably 20 minutes, if that. I populated it in about 30 from the guy's existing schedule, and then I mocked up this thing in Frontier in less than an hour. That's the power of pods, is that you can truthfully model out your data very quickly and see if it's going to work the way you want it to. The only thing I had to do after that was pretty much styling.
And also that you had the advantage of you did this pre-planning.
I did. If I had not done the pre-planning, this would have been like one of those head scratchers for about a week.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really important is, I mean, I'm working on a site right now where I started with mock-ups and then I drew my boxes based on where are the things in my mock-ups going to go, and then I got down to even a spreadsheet of what are my content types, what are my fields, what type of fields, what do they relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And that allowed me to set everything up in pods very quickly, and it turned out I was like 85% right.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the last lesson, is that planning is very important, but you have to be flexible about when you're wrong.
We actually have enough time if we want to show another one, because I don't think we've got any questions out there in the big field out there.
Do we have any good questions?
No, I'm checking to see, and I'm not seeing any, so I think we're actually pretty good.
Well,
if we want to do another,
forever hold your peace.
Yeah, tweet now or forever hold your peace, because we're probably going to do another. We got another demo we could show, or another case study.
Sure.
In this case, I'll show off the Denise Jacobs website, because I think it's a pretty good example of content. Again, let me pull up my little table. This is kind of a common framework site, which is okay. There we go. Let me present to everyone. All right. In the case of this particular website, this is not an uncommon thing where someone needs kind of like an event calendar. So the piece that we're actually doing is building up the back end of all the little talks that she does at all these different little conferences. So in this case, I had to create relationship between talks, which is what someone is talking about, and she also needed to like kind of gather and accumulate and curate all the information out there from different websites, like from YouTube and Vimeo, of all the different videos that she does at each one of these different talks. And then there's also her slide shares that she does for each talk. So you've got slides, you've got videos, you've got talks, and then the one thing that kind of tied it all together was the calendar events. So if I look at one of these little individual pods, which in this case it's the talk pod, and we have a featured video about the talk, we have a featured slide about the talk, and then we have a list of all the different little events that she's actually done the talk at. In this case, if I click on one of the events, I can actually build a backend to the talk itself, so I've got the information about the talk. There's no videos or slides yet from this one, but if I go into one of these older ones, let's see, I think this one has them. Yeah, it does. We have a video and we have a slide from this particular UX event. So on the front end, it looks fairly seamless. This is all about content strategy. It's all about understanding, how your data has to relate to itself, and so that you can actually build a framework that's going to work. So on the back end, what I did was, let's go down into pods down here and boost the screen up. So you can read what I'm saying. A lot of custom post types, a lot of custom taxonomies, and I had to do a lot of rewrite with posts and special slugs and everything in order to match it to the framework that we were looking for the website. But in this case, I had originally called the calendar of events, and then I realized that it made more sense because she has a speaking calendar that is a full, gigantic detail list of every place she's ever talked and everything she's ever done at all those places by month and year. And that's the main piece that I was trying to automate, which I still haven't automated yet, but it's the one thing that I've got left to do. And so it made sense to actually rename that whole thing the calendar instead of events. But basically the calendar collects events. We have slides, we have talks, and we have videos. This is all, unfortunately, in PHP templates, which I'm not going to, I don't think we have time to show you today. But if I go into the calendar and actually look at one of these that's actually populated, I'll go down to one of these guys. You can kind of see from the back end, here's the pods fields down here. You've got an event date. Can you read the screen okay? Or do I need to bump up again? There we go. All right. In this case, for each calendar event that she has, there's a date, a location, an event website, a one-to-one relationship to the talk, and a one-to-one relationship to the video and to the slides, and then all of the other information. If I go into the talks, we'll go down to one that actually has a lot of events at it. Here we go. And stop me if you got a question or if you need me to clarify something too. In this case, this talk has got a one-to-many relationship to events. So we're using the autocomplete taggable to actually be able to pop those in here. There's a featured video and a featured slide. I should have actually done this as a single drop-down or a single checkbox instead of an autocomplete on that one. But all the talk videos and all the talk slides, these are actually populating through the bidirectional relationship from the talks and the videos, or the talks and the slides pods. And that's kind of the power in pods too, is that having a bidirectional relationship between two pods and having them autocomplete and taggable, you can actually get your many-to-many relationships automatically populated for you. I think Josh wants to say something.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you're done, we wanted to answer a question from Slack.
Yeah, let's do that.
So Kevin asks about tools for the sort of diagramming. And Phil and I have given some examples there in Slack, which we'll include in the show notes. I like Lucidchart for diagramming. Phil also suggests Glyphy, also for diagramming. Lucidchart is like a full, total, if you wanted to diagram out a piece of software, it's great for that. It can be a little overblown. Let me share my screen real quick here.
Okay.
because I wanted to show an example of a very simple one I actually did just in Google Drawings. Can you see this, Jim?
Yeah, I think you're on the screen now.
So this is another example of me making 4 boxes and showing my relationships between. This isn't even really a diagramming tool so much, like you can see these are kind of sloppy arrows here that I dragged in. But in this case, I knew I had 4 sort of containers. This is a site I'm working on that connects people based on what they want to do at a conference or at some sort of event to people who are looking for that. So I knew that this was sort of an abstract box down here, form entries that are creating these wants, I'm calling them. But I knew that I needed a relationship to users to show me who it is that created this and what event was it created at. And this was actually an experimental arrow that I didn't really need. In the end, I can actually go ahead and delete that, because this is what I was talking about before about redundant relationships. I don't really need this because I can get to it through these other relationships. But it was something I was thinking about at the time, and then it may or may not continue to exist. It might continue to show what user is registered for this event, i.e. who's the paying user if we monetize this. But this is a very simple example of how these sorts of tools work, that you could just drop in a quick box and over time refine where these arrows go and start to think through, okay, well, this isn't a post type, this is actually the users table, and then start to think through what are my needs for events versus wants. It's a very simple system, really, but it was very useful for conceptualizing this. Look for this in a future blog post I'm working on, actually.
Well, some of the power in pods too is that you can actually, in your pods, when you're actually basically defining those additional relationships that aren't really necessary, you can actually set those up as non-editable fields. So they're automatically populated through the bidirectional relationship, but they're not editable by the end user, so that they're at least giving them information even on the back end, on the admin back end, so that they can see that that relationship actually happened. Because
Yeah.
I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very useful to be able to have that there, just so people get a visual feedback. The person who's in charge of managing the content. Like, I think that's a huge part that often gets overlooked is the management experience. Right. This is one of the reasons why we're using WordPress. No matter how much custom stuff we throw on top of it. At the end of the day, one of the main reasons we're using WordPress is that the post editor is really good. And pretty much anybody who's computer savvy can figure it out in a few minutes. And we know as developers that we can hand this off. And so it's important to think through what's this interface, not just what's the end result, but what kind of feedback is this going to give to the person who has to manage it, who doesn't understand how it all works, but they need to be able to see, this is part of this event when they look at it in the back end.
Exactly.
Do we have any other questions? Do we have any other points, Scott? Phil? Because we're right around time.
Yep, we really are. And Kevin, let me actually ask him, and we've got a question popping through in Slack, I think.
No, I think Phil and Bernard are talking through about the way that WordPress structures its data tables.
Oh, okay.
Well, it might be worth hitting, but if we're on time, I could cover that in chat as well, because he's absolutely right. But it's also about the flexibility of the whole system of WordPress. So
take 2 minutes and explain it. It's a good point.
Okay. Well, yeah, the point that he brings up is that if you, as I said, default to sticking with the standard WordPress post types and use the meta storage, that goes against all the principles that you learn of SQL normalization, and he's absolutely right about that. It's what is basically known as error attribute value storage. It's effectively key value pairs stored in the database. What WordPress has to address is they're making a system and they don't know what sort of boxes and what shape boxes you'll need to store your data. They don't know if you're going to be a real estate company and you're going to need to store how many bedrooms and whether or not there's air conditioning, or if you're going to be storing information about events, or if you're going to be storing information about classes. And to do proper normalization, you have to know all about your boxes. You have to know specifically about your data and the underlying signatures and the relationships between them. And there's no way making a generic framework can anticipate all the things that you'll need. So their decision was to use something more generic that isn't as efficient for large data sets, but is generic enough that you can put anything in the post table, and they've managed to go a long way with it. So you get, as a bonus, there's two bonuses really with EAV storage. Number one is sparse storage. If you only need a couple of pieces of meta on a couple of posts, then you haven't set aside storage that's being empty with nulls for all the other records that don't need that information. You can just stick a couple of pieces of meta on a couple of records and you're done. And secondly, and this is the big one that's carried WordPress a long way, is the fact that you can store whatever meta you need and make it up on the fly. So again, when you have small amounts of records with posts, if you're talking about a few hundred and you're really only querying a few per page, you're sacrificing the efficiency you would get with proper normalization for the fact that you can interoperate with anything that works with WordPress, because your search tools, anything that can work with post meta can work with Pod's post meta. So it's a trade-off, and you do have to make that decision. Is the efficiency going to affect me? And if so, do go with the proper normalizations and stick it in ACTs. But if not, it is a good default because you get all that extra functionality from the plugins that'll work with your meta. If you stick with that, then all the plugins out there that work with it'll work with your stuff.
Yeah, I think there's two. Well, let's get to Kevin's question in 1 second, because Kevin has a good question before we wrap up. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that WordPress.com, including all the WordPress VIP stuff, is using the normal meta table. And WordPress.com is a massive install that they've managed to scale as a multi-site, and all the tools that they're using are open source. So it gets more into a back-end question than anything, I think, sometimes.
Well, let's go ahead and ask Kevin's question.
Let's ask Kevin's question before we go, which I think is a very important part of planning, which is he's saying, I'm developing in MAMP, a local development, which is good. 2 points for Kevin. Everybody should be developing locally with MAMP or desktop server or Vagrant, whatever you choose. But then what do I do for deployment? And that gets tricky because of the way that Pods is stored. Pods configurations are posts. Pods fields are posts. They have post meta. And I don't want to get too much into it because I have an article here that covers all of this. And frankly, this could be its own PodsCast episode. But there are good tools out there. There's Backup Buddy by iThemes. There's WP Migrate DB Pro by Delicious Brains that will let you do complete or partial migrations. The first time you do, it's very easy. Just copy the database to live. It gets very tricky when you are updating an existing site and you need to change your configurations. One good thing is we do have the Pods deploy system that'll just move your Pods configuration. Also, WP Migrate DB Pro now does let you move just specific post types, so you could move your options table. Be careful about that, what your changes are between live, along with your pods, and pods fields. That's an option for you. Also, for certain plugins, WP-C-FM, again by Matt Gibbs, is a cool plugin for just deploying very specific options. That's useful for pods, but useful for other plugins. It's an important thing to consider in your planning, but there's not a good blanket answer to that question. But we do have a article I just put in the Slack channel, and we will put in the show notes for this, covering all the different situations.
Okay. I don't think we have any other questions. So, do you guys have any other points to make, Scott or Phil?
I'm good here.
Nothing
Okay.
on my side besides, I would just say that one of the most important things when doing a project is before jumping into code, always figure out what your structure is on your data, because that's almost every time we run into a project where we're dealing with nightmare issues where we have to migrate a bunch of data, it's because the data wasn't in the right structure to begin with. They spend tons of hours trying to work around that structure. That's just a very important thing to get done right the first time. So I'm just reiterating that.
Yeah.
Yeah, do
Very
your
true.
planning.
Plan first.
It's an hour or two of your life that can save you hours, if not weeks, and if you're paying a developer tons of money. It make your life better. So,
Exactly.
thanks for joining us.
Okay, our next episode will be in, I said 2 weeks, but it's actually, I guess, in 3 weeks. It's on April 7th, 2015, and returning to our regular time of 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 6 p.m. UTC. You can find the archives of the show at our website at http://pods.io/category/podscasts, and also on our YouTube channel at http://youtube.com/user/podsframework. We'll also, I think that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for joining us for our podcast, and we look forward to your questions and comments for the next 1 and 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.